Hello everyone, and welcome to my review-thoughts on-critical look at GRIS. Firstly, in case you can't tell, I don't really know what to call this series, so, we're kind of going to think of a couple things, and that also explains the slightly awkward intro. But anyway, let's get into the game, shall we? Just to explain the format really quickly though, what I've decided I'm going to do with these, I've only made two in the past, it's not really a series in fairness, but anyway, what I'm going to do with these is I'm going to essentially split the review into two halves. You're going to have the first half, which is going to be a spoiler-free, very overview style kind of look at the game, and then I'm going to move more into spoilers and kind of like the deeper meanings of certain things and things that I can only speak about if you've actually played the game to the end. So, depending on which you're interested in, it will define how much of the video you need to watch. But before I get into either of those, honestly, I just wanted to take a second and just let you guys watch this. So yeah, as you can see, right off the bat, it's a pretty gorgeous game. I mean, there's really no doubt about it. In my opinion, this very much looks like the kind of game that was probably made by art students rather than made by game students, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like when it comes to games, because they're so artistic and so many of them, especially in the indie world, are very art-focused, you get games that are designed by artists and then sort of made by, developed at some point. They learn how to make games or whatever. Or you have game students, usually the more mechanics-focused ones, that then scramble together some art for it. And I'd say things in the latter category are definitely a lot more common. So a game like GRIS, where the focus is almost entirely on the art, is kind of, I wouldn't say to be more celebrated, but it's definitely rarer. And right off the bat, I will say that I think for a lot of people, whether you like this game or not, is going to come a large extent down to how much you enjoy the presentation. Because at the end of the day, it's not just how good it looks, it's how well it's animated, as well as how varied the whole game is in terms of visual appeal, and also how good the soundtrack is. Like, shout out to whoever did the music on this. It really is just a gorgeous, lush, very atmospheric, set of instrumentations, or instrumentals, I guess I should say. Although there are some vocals, as you just heard. Now, the first question you might have is, which camp of people do I fall into? Am I someone who kind of sees the art appeal and very much respects it and enjoys it from that angle, or am I someone who sees the kind of lack of particularly interesting mechanics and I was bored by this game? Which of those two camps do I fall into? Because I feel like most people will fall into those, despite the fact this is a very highly critically acclaimed game. And truth being told, I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. I really love games that go for these incredibly ambitious kind of themes, which it does, and I'll get into those in the spoilery part of the review, and incredibly grandiose presentations. However, at the same time, I am very much someone who enjoys solid mechanics as well, especially when it comes to like board games. I'm a huge fan of more mechanically driven games. And therefore, as a result, I did find a lot of the really basic, kind of like simple and almost played out to an extent platforming and puzzle elements of GRIS to be a little lackluster. In fact, I should probably get into that now. So ultimately what GRIS is it's a side-scrolling puzzle platformer. I suppose you could say adventure game, but I mean that's the most vague, genre title in human history, so it's kind of whatever. But the two main ones really are puzzle and platform. And it does a fair amount with the platforming. Like, there are some interesting moments towards the end of the game in the things they introduce. So obviously you get like a double jump, for example, is very typical. But one of the interesting things is your kind of like the robe that you have draped over your character can turn into a like cube, and it has weight associated with it. Which I thought was pretty interesting. I haven't really seen that in a game before, but it is essentially just a downward dive or downward attack type thing. It's not the most innovative thing in the world, for sure. The puzzle elements come in when you have things like, there was one point in the game where you had a small like minion following you, which is kind of a creature in this very strange world who you had to feed apples to, and by feeding apples to him, he did various things and, progressed you on the path of the game. But to be honest, even though all of these elements were like completely fine, none of them were particularly mind-blowing whatsoever. And in fact there were quite a few gameplay frustrations, which again brings you back to my earlier point where I said I feel like this is a game made by art students, not necessarily by game designers. And what I mean by that is, for example, the first 45 minutes of the game are more or less just walking simulator-esque, which I'm completely fine with, for the record. I enjoyed Dear Esther and Gone Home, which I know a lot of people have a ton of gripes with. But the difference between those games and this is, narratively, this is told very much visually, and in the start of the game there really isn't that much, for a reason that I will explain in the more spoilery part of the review. But basically, there's not much to grasp on mechanically or narratively, so you kind of wonder what you're doing for the first 45 minutes. You're just sort of holding the analog stick to the right and continuing on this linear train track. It's really unfortunate way to start the game, because I do think that despite its shortcomings, this game is actually kind of special. But to sum up the spoiler-free part of this, I would say if you're looking for an incredibly ambitious, incredibly beautiful, incredibly amazing sounding game, then you should probably pick this up. It's only £15 and it's available on Switch, Steam, and I would assume PS4. I'm not 100% sure on that. I should probably check. There'll be a link into the description of where you can buy it, so the answer will be down there. But if you're looking for something like that, it would definitely, you could do a hell of a lot worse than GRIS. That's for damn sure. But again, just be aware that if you're super into your mechanics and gameplay, you're not really going to find a ton here. It's very bare bones in those regards. But now to move on to the more spoilery part of the games. Basically, the core theme of this game and the centre of this game is around, I don't necessarily want to say loss, nice meme by the way, but seriously, I don't necessarily want to say loss, but more grief and kind of wallowing in your own misery, I guess, because although it's very abstract and definitely not directly told to you, I think it's very clear that this character gains strengths kind of represented via platforming powers throughout the game. So for example, at the start, you just sort of have your head draped down, as you've probably seen in the footage. I'm going to take the footage after I do the recording, so I have no idea what's showing on screen right now. But yeah, it's shown in the character's kind of very lazy animation, her very depressed mood. It's very visual, it's very obvious in your face. And as you go through the game, you unlock powers, and also you unlock colours. Now, the colours themselves actually play really well into the art of the game, because at the start you have this very bare bones but gorgeous backdrop that's all white, and I think first you unlock red. There's 5 total, so you have uncoloured red, yellow, I want to say green and blue, I'm pretty sure all the colours, and I actually had to read this up afterwards because I didn't really catch this, and this is kind of another shortcoming of the game in my opinion, despite it being so artistic and ambitious, is that basically each of the colours are one of the different stages of grief. Well, I think that's what they call it anyway. The 5 stages of... I think it's the 5 stages of grief. Yeah, denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance is the last one. I forget what the 4th one is, or I may have missed one. But yeah, the point. And there's a couple clues in the game that this is the case, and that's the achievements, actually. If anything, there's 5 secret achievements named with the 5 stages of grief, and you have to perform some action in-game that would somewhat represent it. So, for example, I remember in the backdrop of one section of the game, there were these little, like, rock statues that whenever you walked past, they sort of jiggled. And if you did the, like, downward dash attack, the, like, cube block attack thing, then they would fall over. And if you knock over all of them, you get an achievement for anger. So it kind of gives you a clue as to what is going on in this world. It gives you more of a clue that, like, okay, this character has lost something, which again is visually represented in the intro animation that I showed you guys, where you can see her, she's floating, she's singing, she's kind of at peace with herself, and then all of a sudden her world starts collapsing around her, she stops floating, she loses her voice. It's clearly meant to be some sort of representation of a great trauma. And again, going through the game, you gain those powers back, and I think that's a really, really clever angle. But unfortunately, I feel like each time you unlock a colour dash power, it's not really that represented in the game. You kind of just go straight from, like, this hugely depressed state to quite a capable person and seemingly just have everything together. Or at least it's not so obvious that it stuck out to me as, like, this is what is happening. It's something I had to piece together afterwards. I will say one thing they do very well, though, is it's very obvious, like I said at the start, that she's gone through some amount of grief, and it's clear throughout the game that this is some kind of internal demon. I think it's manifested by this kind of dark bird figure that chases you through a lot of the parts of the game. I guess you could call it really like a boss battle, but honestly, it's not really much. Like, unfortunately, the main chase bit, you pretty much don't need to put any input in other than pressing A every now and again to, like, dash away. When you learn how to swim, you can kind of, like, do a very quick dash, I guess, in a direction by pressing A, and you just spam it. You don't even need to hold forwards, and you'll be out of range of the bird the whole time, which was very unfortunate, but I guess that's just what they decided to do. But what I will say is, as you play the game, despite this boss battle was, like I said, rather kind of lackluster to an extent, it is very clear that this bird is some kind of inner manifestation of your demons, because towards the end of the game, your own face appears in it, and I thought that was a nice visual representation. It made it very, like, obvious, but in a very artistic way. It certainly didn't feel ham-fisted, and it didn't feel overly pretentious either. I thought that was a well-done touch. But again, I feel like a lot of this is kind of for naught, because the themes just aren't that obvious as you're playing the game, except for the very start and the very end, despite the fact it's presented in such an artistic manner. But just to close up the point on the art, I do want to say that I did very much enjoy the art in this game. I did very much enjoy the visual representation of everything in this game. And it's a large reason as to why I finished it, really. You know, there's stuff at the end that's pretty interesting. So, for example, you have these puzzles where basically... I mean, I call them puzzles very loosely. But you can see kind of the regular buildings that you're moving around, but then occasionally you won't be able to progress and you'll wander away. So you might backtrack a little bit and you'll realise there's like a light bug, and you go grab the light bug, and now things in the background start being illuminated when you're near them, so you can start climbing up those physical objects, which I thought was a really nice visual touch. But again, like I said, the main appeal for me of this game is the art. I'm going to go back into the gameplay though, just to kind of re-illustrate, really, how weak I thought it was. So at the start of the game, like I said, you don't really have much. You can jump and you can walk. That's literally it. And again, unfortunately, the start of the game kind of wastes a lot of your time. You spend a lot of the time just walking in a straight line. Again, like I said, there's not really that much to feast on visually, because you haven't unlocked that many colours. And although everything looks nice, it looks the same for 45 minutes. It's not the greatest impression you could have at the start. The intro cinematic is a large part of the reason as to why I kept going on, so it was just like, that was such an incredible, you know, opening that I want to see what they have artistically for me. And again, it does pick up artistically, but I feel like a huge shortcoming is that even though they introduce a lot more mechanics as you go forwards, it never felt that challenging nor that interesting. Pretty much everything you see in this game, if you've played a decent number of these types of games before, you'll recognise the challenges, you'll recognise the jumps you have to make, you'll recognise that even the gameplay gimmicks, for example, the water parts where you have to use momentum, you'll recognise those. The section where, so at one point you get like a symmetry world above you, and there's kind of like a line defining it, and when you jump up and hit the line, the gravity flips, so you suddenly go upwards instead. Exactly, it's basically straight out of VVVVV, how many other V's there are in that title. But you get the point. It's kind of unfortunate that this game that had such a beautiful presentation is in a way so let down from its actual gameplay. And that's pretty much everything I have to say about GRIS. I think it's, again, a gorgeous game that is just unfortunately a little new in terms of game design. Oh, sorry, not new, more, I guess I should say a little old and played out in terms of game design. But yeah, I mean, I landed somewhere in the middle. I think that may be a slightly controversial opinion. It seems like a lot of people are really enjoying this game. And hey, look, if you enjoy it, don't let me hold you back from it. I just think there are some things it could have done a hell of a lot better. Having said that though, I do think this game will appeal to a lot more people than just me. So again, if you like what you see, honestly, you're basically going to get what you see. Just maybe don't expect it to wow you in the first kind of 45 minutes of play. You're going to need to push past that point. And the game is like, what? I don't know, maybe like 5 hours I think it took me to complete. So there is enough game there to enjoy afterwards for sure. So again, if this looks appealing to you, definitely consider it, especially on Switch. I could see this being a really nice game on Switch to play, you know, when you're just sort of traveling somewhere. You don't want anything too intense, but it just sort of looks nice, right? In a way, I suppose I would describe this game as kind of like, it's almost like playing through an art student's portfolio, you know? There's lots of really nice stuff in there. It's very cohesive and clearly has a style, but ultimately maybe not so much substance because it is just kind of a large scrapbook with lots of things thrown together. Now, to give it more credit, like I said, I do think the themes are really interesting and should be explored in games more, and I think this is an interesting way to explore those themes as well. Again, though, I just wish that it played to the strength of gaming, and that is to merge the kind of art and the themes into the mechanics in some way, which again, like I said, I don't really think it did. I feel like after you get past the initial sort of wallowing in your own sadness part, you immediately just feel like, oh, this character's just the character, and then at the very end you suddenly realise, oh wait, she's really happy because we got all of the things back and I guess she's content or whatever. But yeah, again, I liked this game. I thought it was decent. If I had to score it, I'd probably honestly give it like a 5 out of 10, but recognise on some objective level it's probably more like a 7 in fairness. But yeah, those are pretty much all my thoughts. I hope you've really enjoyed this video. I've certainly enjoyed making it. It's nice to get back to doing something like this. The rest of my videos at the minute are just Twitch VODs or whatever. But yeah, if you've enjoyed this video, definitely make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. All those things help me out a ton. If not, I hope you've enjoyed the video at least, and I'll see you guys around.